Hi, I'm Melissa Ferrer-Smith from Forward Thinking Leverage Solutions, and welcome to Tea Time with Missy. I am so happy to introduce our special guest, Alana Ackels, and she's a partner with Bell Nunnally Martin. Alana advises employers on how to minimize risks, protect businesses, and navigate through a multitude of state and federal law governing employer and employee relationships. She also prepares employment agreements, confidentiality statements, non-compete agreements, handbooks, and other policies that mitigate risk. Which takes us to a very important topic nowadays is minimizing risk while returning to work during COVID-19. Alana, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Melissa, thank you so much for having me today. Happy to be here and talk through some of these really tough issues, but really important issues, and try to help businesses navigate all of this. It's unprecedented, really.
It is. It's just, chaotic. But how are you? How's your family and work throughout this whole pandemic?
We're doing well, we're hanging in there. Work has been busy, right? So the United States government has passed a multitude of new laws in the wake of COVID-19, including new mandatory paid sick leave and enhanced family leave laws, as well as various, payroll protection program loans that really implicate employee bases. Loan forgiveness is impacted by layoffs and things like that. And, unfortunately, a lot of businesses had to do layoffs at the outset of the pandemic. And so just helping, partnering with our clients, helping them navigate all of this and trying to find solutions that are the best fit for them and their businesses and their future. So it's been busy, but we're healthy and we're grateful for that.
Yes, it's been some time. Thank you. I have a few questions. Of course, I'd love to share your expertise so that we can continue to help businesses out there. And one of my first questions is, as we're in this phased approach, employers are resuming business. What are some inherent risks that companies face, and how can they proactively manage it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we're starting to get a lot from our clients. So I think the best way to answer that question is sort of in three parts. So the first part being, what are the risks from a legal perspective and a practical perspective? And then secondly, how do we mitigate that risk, which comes down to planning and communication. The first part of that is, what are the risks? From a practical perspective, we obviously as businesses want to keep our workforce healthy so that we don't have an outbreak and we don't get shut down, right? We want to keep our employees healthy so that they can stay working and stay active and stay engaged so that we can get back on our feet and become profitable again. From a legal perspective, there's also a legal obligation that employers take steps to reasonably protect their workers and anyone that comes onto their premises for that matter. So customers, vendors, things like that. And those legal obligations are imposed both by the federal government through OSHA and also through just the common law.
Right.
And so we're already starting to hear from plaintiffs' personal injury attorneys, actually, that they're kind of gearing up for this next phase of litigation in terms of COVID-19 cases. And so when we talk about mitigating risk for employers, what we want to do is just make sure that companies are taking steps to provide a reasonably safe workplace for their workers. The law does not require that an employer guarantee the safety of their workers. It just requires that the employer take reasonable steps to protect workers. And so that's going to require a couple of things from businesses. It's going to require that they stay abreast of all federal and local guidelines. As you know, Governor Abbott, at least for the folks in Texas, issued a report earlier this week that's got a multitude of guidelines really set out by industry. And so things like, for restaurants that are reopening, they're only allowed to reopen at certain percentages. There can only be 6 people per table maximum, things like that. So businesses really need to make sure that they're keeping up with all state and federal guidelines when it comes to what are best practices.
Mhm.
And our firm website has a great COVID-19 resource page on it.
Right,
So
me
anyone that
too.
has questions about what those guidelines are and what they say can check there. And you should be able to find the information that you need. And we're keeping it up to date in real time.
You all have a very comprehensive list, which is nice that you're generous to put that out there to all businesses that they can periodically read and go through your website.
Thank you, Melissa. So yeah, staying abreast of those guidelines, but that should really be the floor and not the ceiling. And so this is where talking with an HR consultant like yourself or your outside counsel, whoever your trusted advisor is, this is where businesses should really start crafting a plan that is customized to their industry, their business, their customers, their unique workforce. And so we're starting to do that with our clients as we start to reopen. So this is where we kind of move into how do we mitigate risk, which is to create a plan, right? Because ultimately, in these COVID-19 cases, we don't know how those are going to play out. That will happen in the court system in years to
Mhm.
come.
Right.
But we do know one thing, which is that employers can be taking steps now to ensure that they're taking those reasonable steps so that there is no liability in the future. And so that's where we come into making a plan.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so important that companies sit down and take a customized approach based on their industry and the standard of care for that industry. So, for example, um, the protocols put in place and the policies put in place by a company that runs a bunch of assisted living facilities might be different than a company that runs a manufacturing facility where it's easy for folks to be 6 feet apart when they're working on the line. And so we look at what is the standard of care for this industry and what are the steps that the employer should be taking to ensure that workers and other folks coming onto their premises are reasonably protected. And so that's making the plan. And then, the third part of all of this is communicating the plan to the workforce. We've got to make sure that our employees know that we're taking steps to ensure their safety and that we're committed to fighting this thing, right?
Mhm.
And so make a written plan, a written policy, send it out to your workforce, post it in a break room. For employers where it's feasible, you might consider doing a signed acknowledgement form so that, if you do end up in litigation a year from now, 2 years from now, whenever it might be, you're able to say, hey, look, we had a policy in place. This employee signed an acknowledgement, said that she read and understood the policy. And I think that's going to go a long way in mitigating risk for employers down the line.
It's key to have a plan, right? And designing it and being deliberate and thinking what applies to your business. On the flip side to that, what are some inherent risks for employees? How do they handle that coming back to work and preserving their jobs?
So this is a great question because we're starting to hear that some people are scared to come back to work. They want to come back to work, but they're scared. And so the guidance that we have from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC,
Mhm.
is that fear of returning to work is not a valid basis not to come back
Mhm.
unless there is a reasonable fear of imminent danger. And what that means is essentially death or serious bodily harm. So, unless the employee can reasonably show that there's a legitimate fear of death or serious bodily injury, then fear of returning to work is not a legitimate basis to no show. Now, that being said, we're starting to see, as you might imagine, folks that are calling their employers saying things like, I have a pre-existing lung condition and my doctor is telling me that I can't come back into the office or I can't interact with people. I need to ensure that I'm staying I'm minimizing as much contact as possible. And so this is where we're going to start seeing the interplay of COVID-19 return to work and Americans with Disabilities Act issues and reasonable accommodations. And this is where it's really important for businesses to partner with their internal HR team or an HR consultant like yourself or outside legal counsel, whoever it is, because these can get complicated. We do not know yet whether COVID-19 is going to be treated as a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But
Right.
in the example I gave of the person with the pre-existing lung condition, that might well be considered a disability under the ADA. And
Mhm.
so then we have to think about, as a company, is there something that we can do for this employee that would allow her to continue working, that would not pose an undue burden on the business? And
Right.
so that might include something like giving her an alternate shift for the rest of the quote unquote pandemic while we're still, going through this peak time. It could mean work from home if that's a legitimate option for this person. The employer doesn't have to give accommodations that pose an undue burden on the business. But I think that as we navigate these new issues, it's just going to become really important for the employee and the employer to work together.
Mhm.
We've got to collaborate on these things and see if there's a way that we can get everybody back to work and becoming productive again.
Right. Right. Yeah, and that there's an open dialogue, a welcoming, genuine open dialogue. Um,
Absolutely. It's so important.
it,
Communication through this process is going to be one of the key factors for
Mhm.
success, I think.
Wow. How can companies use their experiences today with coronavirus and design, let's just say hypothetically, a future plan? Should there be another pandemic in the far or near future? How do they manage this?
It's a great question. So, this is where we go back to the plan, right?
Hmm.
Nobody likes surprises. And I don't think anyone wants to be caught off guard if we have another spike in the fall, as some experts are predicting.
Hmm.
And so I think this is where the companies need to stay abreast of federal and local guidelines in terms of what are the best practices. They need to craft their COVID-19 policy,
Hmm.
and they need to stay on top of it. This is not something that we just want to let go by the wayside. We want to revisit the policy and the latest guidance every month or two and make sure that we're prepared and we're ready. And so, some of that plan will also be things like, how do we deal with someone who's got a positive diagnosis or has
Hmm.
come into contact with someone with a positive diagnosis?
Hmm.
And companies were recommending that they designate one person as their COVID-19 representative, and that
Hmm.
person is going to be sort of the gatekeeper of the information. That's the person employees need to go to.
That's a great
Um,
idea.
yeah, for mandatory reporting, and they need to know that their medical information is going to be kept confidential with that person and only shared on a need to know basis. Um, and we get into some of the disability related inquiries and medical exams when we talk about mandatory temperature checks and things like that. And the guidance that we have from the EEOC and other governing bodies is that during a pandemic, when the virus poses a direct threat to the workforce, companies can do these medical exams like temperature checks, and we
Mhm.
can make disability and health related inquiries like, are you showing symptoms and things like that. Um, when we progress out of the pandemic phase, we may find that employers have less leeway to do some of that
Right.
until we get back into a pandemic phase. And so, companies will have to continue monitoring this in order to know what's permitted under the law. And they just need to stay on top of this so that they're ready and they can spring into action with a plan if we see another resurgence of this in the fall or in the next few years.
Right. I think it's key to stay abreast because it changes every day, right? As we're all kind of looking at the news. But even within our state, right, as Governor Abbott states, there are changes within the county. The numbers may be peaking in one county and another neighboring county. It may be, dropping. So every jurisdiction varies, and it's important to continue to read what's going on.
It's so true. And, that's going to be a unique challenge for our clients who are multi jurisdictional employers, right? So, if you're a national employer and you've got businesses in multiple states or even in Texas and multiple counties, it's going to be critical that your policies and procedures account for the varying degrees of, shelter in place or whatever the guidance is in that jurisdiction. And that's where it becomes really important. You're not alone in this, it's important to reach out and get the help you need.
So, Elena, looking into the future in this new phased approach, where numbers can peak and drop, what advice can you give the general employee population at every level, things that they should be doing looking into the future?
So, for the employees out there, my advice is to take care of yourself.
Mhm.
I once got the advice as a baby lawyer that no one's going to look out for you except for you. And I know that sounds really harsh, but there's some truth to that. Companies have a legal obligation to take steps to protect their workers. That's absolutely true. But at the end of the day, it's important for employees to also think about, now that we have this new part of our daily lives, is this job the best fit for them? If they work in retail and they're a sales associate and they no longer feel comfortable being customer facing, then
Mhm.
that's probably not the right job for them anymore.
Right.
A company has to take steps to reasonably accommodate a worker, but they don't have to change the essential functions of the job. So there's
Right.
probably not a way for you to continue being a sales associate in retail and not be customer facing, right? And so it's important that when the dust settles from all of this, employees kind of take a moment to reflect and think about what's going to be best for them and their families. Yes, we all have to put food on the table. Yes, we all have to earn a living. But if there's one thing that this pandemic has taught us, it's that life can be short sometimes. And so
Mhm.
let's make sure that we're doing something that we enjoy and that we feel comfortable coming to work every day.
Mhm.
Um, the silver lining about being an at-will employee is that you can leave anytime for any reason you want. And
Right.
so I think that when the dust settles from all of this, people should take a little bit of time to reflect and make sure that they're in the job that's the right fit for them.
Great advice. That's a very good point. And I do think that employers make a lot of accommodations, but the employees need to own what's best for themselves and their well-being. And that's a key point. Elena, has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Our viewers, once we get this posted, please go ahead and ask your questions. My role with Forward Thinking Leverage Solutions has to do with help businesses set up a plan. And now during these times, of course, that may be a process, steps, and designing a strategy to optimize how they conduct business. And Elena can help your organization mitigate risk as we go into a new way of conducting business. She can be reached directly through her email. Elena, thank you so much for your time. And thanks to Bell Nunnally and Martin for also sharing your expertise, allowing your time to be with us. I'm so appreciative.
Thank you for having me here today, Melissa. And thank you for all that you're doing to support industry in North Texas. You're doing a great job, and we appreciate all of your efforts, and happy to visit with anyone that might have questions.
Perfect. Thank you. And we wish everyone well. Stay safe.